Hey everyone, welcome to the very first episode of this year's Christmas Carol Countdown. Today I will be joined by my cousin Sarah to talk about one of the oldest versions of the story, a silent film from 1913. However, before we begin, I just wanted to warn you that the audio in this is less than ideal. We were using a different computer than we usually use, and apparently it wasn't picking up the audio from my external mic. I think it sounds horrible. I know some people won't even care, but I care about stuff like that, so I'll see what I can do to improve it in editing, but just know in advance that it isn't that great, and I'll try to remedy it for our next review. Anyway, today we are going to be talking about a movie that we tried to find last year, but we were unsuccessful. A lot of times the older a movie is, the harder it is to find, and in some cases, for whatever reason, if no one made an effort to preserve them, some films can just be lost. And I kind of wondered if that had happened with this one. However, several months ago, one of our viewers, Troy Diamond, sent me a message on Facebook. He had found a copy and sent it to me for us to watch. So thanks for the help, Troy. It's nice to know that people are watching and willing to help when they can. This isn't even the first time that that's happened. Someone else found an obscure version of Alice in Wonderland I've been looking for last year and sent that to me. One of these days, we're going to have to watch that one as well. Anyway, today's video is about 1913's Scrooge, which was a British film, and then it was re-released in America, I think in 1926 as Old Scrooge. I'm not sure why they changed the name, but whatever. Aside from the title, it's still the same film. And again, before we get into the review, I just want to apologize once more for the audio. It's not painfully bad, but it's less than ideal, which is almost painfully bad in my own opinion. Hopefully I'll figure out the correct settings the next time. Anyway, on to the review. I was thinking that this was going to be like a charming way to start out the season, like go back, watch an old silent film, quaint acting from years gone by. I was wrong.
Not all movies are created equal from back then, and you're safer with this one because it actually has a book to draw off of that's G-rated. They have some material to work with, but it's almost like they try to overcompensate with the acting because they don't have the verbal storytelling in with it. More than one thing. First off, we started watching this, and whoever paired the music with this version was using like stuff that sounded like it belonged in the 80s or 90s and just all over the place, including some opera and everything that didn't lend itself to the proper feel of this movie. I would have liked to see something like gramophone recording or old piano, something that would feel more like the old theater.
I think we might have had a similar complaint about a different one last year.
Oh yeah.
It's like they don't know how to pair the correct music with the film, or they're on a low budget or whatever.
They're trying, but it just doesn't fit, and it can be grating. So at some point we did mute it. So if you watch this, I recommend finding your own soundtrack or just watching it muted. It's also slower paced, which on the one hand I can appreciate because most of the time I'm not a speed reader, so to have the little card up there long enough for me to read the whole description is helpful. But they spent so much time on the early part of the story, and then they skimped on the ghost part of the story, and they added stuff in that didn't belong there, and it still could have been more charming than it was. The guy that they got to play Scrooge was such a total ham, and he ended up seeming kind of creepy after he became good.
Yeah.
And I think maybe their standards of what creepy and not creepy looked like were different back then. But him hauling out mistletoe and wanting to kiss Mrs. Cratchit on the cheek, like today, be like, dude, that's my wife. Back off. Don't you even think about my daughters.
It was a very awkward scene.
That was just one thing. And then, like, when he's apologizing to Bob Cratchit and he's just, like, kissing his hand and stuff, it's like, yeah.
He was acting very odd.
Once again, it's the whole thing of trying to demonstrate his repentance, but it ended up seeming kind of toady and creepy. And you remember that character? Oh, what was his name? That creepy redhead from that other Dickens. Oh, Uriah Heep. I am your humble servant. But he just seemed kind of unstable and oily and gross, and it was kind of in that vein. I also felt like, and I haven't totally dug through this, but I feel like the children's hairstyles probably weren't period correct. They looked period correct to me for 1913, as well as the women's hairstyles for that period. I was seeing more than one hairstyle that looked more like a Gibson than Charles Dickens era. That has to be one of the least of your worries with this.
And this is something that, like, I'm not going to pick out. This is, like, Sarah's area of expertise, so
thank you.
Most people probably aren't going to notice.
It shows you that beef goes back that far, at least, of doing period films, but not doing the style correctly all the way through. But if they're not even, I mean, Jacob Marley was all of the ghosts.
That was like one of the worst things they did wrong. It's like no ghost scene was done correctly. And plus, the whole thing took place in the office.
Yeah, he didn't even go home. So this seemed very, very
low budget. Like they couldn't afford a second set. They had to set it all in the same place. And in this version, Scrooge does get pelted with fake snowballs. So if you're into that... They really didn't look like snowballs at all. It's like somebody took a bunch of old socks, stuffed them into an even bigger sock, and threw one. And they kind of looked like the snow kind of looked like it was flour, like children were flinging flour. So you have to wonder, was this filmed in summertime with fake snow? Does that remind you of any other Christmas movies these days? Not naming any names. Anyway. Are you talking about Hallmark? My dad has, I don't know if obsession is the right word. It's like, there's that fake snow, and how are they doing that? And I think he looked it up and found out that they use snow blankets. And the other day I was watching a movie with him. It's like, is that window open on the house? Like they're outside in the snow, and there was a window open up in the house. And he was noticing how in another movie a casement window was open. Anyway. One of the things that is interesting about this is that it does give you more of the flavor of 1913. It gives you a little window, probably, into the way they would have talked, even just by reading the cue cards. Even describing Charles Dickens' father as improvident. Did you catch that? Mm-hmm. Who says that word anymore? No one. No one. And showing his birthplace and urging people to read that story multiple times. I don't care if you read that story multiple times, even though I do this series. I have my own thoughts about that story. Anyway, but it did show his birthplace, and it showed a little bit of the moral tenor of the era, I think. And also into the 20s if they're replaying it. Another thing that's interesting about this is it's being filmed in 1913, so if you want to get all philosophical and melancholy about it, this is the year before World War I hits, and all of these people's lives, unless they passed away before it happened, are going to be touched by that. I mean, you can't help but wonder, did Fred go off to war? The guy who played him? Stuff like that. And how much was their optimism scathed after the fact? Making this movie and then post-war. That's my curiosity. Because there's definitely, I think there's a good amount of optimism in it, and urging to be good and all of these things, which is good on its own, but it's just interesting to view it in that context. Which I hadn't even thought of. But anyway. So it's slow and accurate to the book. Don't listen to the music or just add in your own. And mildly unsettling, but still historically interesting if you're into either period, I guess. That's probably the biggest praise we can give to it. historically interesting.
If you're interested in 1913 theater, that's a good little window. I mean, there was a scene with a couple of dudes outside of Charles Dickens' birthplace, and they were wearing the hats. Like, one of them had a straw hat and the other one had a cap, and it was, I mean, seeing that straw hat and that guy's duds, that was really cool. And it was also kind of weird when they were in there and, you know, Charles Dickens was writing the story, and so you have this close-up of this hand, and it was really well defined, and just to think that's some guy's hand in 1913.
These are things I didn't even think about watching this. This is why I like having guests. You get totally different perspectives.
Guess so. So, I think that's really about it. I would say, I don't think that we've had any of these silent versions that we were totally blown away by.
Mm-hmm.
But I think we've had one or more that we liked better.
Yeah. This one, I think, gets lower marks for me just because it's much longer than the others. So it feels...
Yeah, you have to endure more to get to the end. If you're interested in watching a silent version, I would suggest looking at our other reviews and picking one that we felt more favorably about, and it's shorter.
Yeah, I think most of them were a lot shorter than this. This is probably the longest silent film we've watched on, like, for any story.
I don't know.
Okay, yeah, I think this is probably going to be all for us for today. We haven't figured out, like, an exact roster of what titles we're going to watch for this series this year, but I think Sarah wants me to see one from the 80s.
Childhood trauma. But honestly, while there are things that disturb me about that film, there's some really good things about that version too. So that one might be coming your way. It's the one I grew up watching and looking away from on the creepy parts. They actually do accomplish the ghost story effect.
Hey everyone, thanks for watching. I've got a bunch more reviews coming up this month, and next time I will be joined by Rachel Wagner to talk about one of the most out there versions of the story, Blackadder's Christmas Carol. It's almost the exact opposite of what you would expect for this story. Anyway, we'll see you next time. Bye.